Look at that thumbnail. I feel like I've leveled up my thumbnail skills. I love it. It's a little cluttered, but I feel like that's how the week's been. There's just been a lot of news. So, lots of stuff going on. Greta blew off a whole movement. So it's taken over social media. Everywhere I look is Greta. So, had to have her in the middle, of course. Anyway, let me change my feed. Perfect. Hello and welcome to my channel, Re-Vera. My name is Steve, and this channel is all about the concept that truth matters and how we can get to the truth. So it's all about critical thinking and applying that lens, that way of thinking, that methodology to everything that comes up. So today we're going to see how it applies to politics. So super excited. Get into it. So as you can see up on my screen, what have we here? The Whistleblower Complaint. So this dropped like a couple tons of TNT. I cannot. The first thing I just noticed this right before the stream, was the date, because this has all been blowing up in the last few days. So I assumed that it just came out the last few days, but that's a month and a half ago. What the hell? Go figure. So anyway, I was looking that up, and sure enough, it looks like there was an effort to suppress it. Big surprise. The actual phone call took place, I believe it was July 25th, something like that. But it's really interesting. Whoever the whistleblower is, very intelligent person. They knew they would try to cover it up. They knew they would try to classify it. So he intentionally wrote this in such a way as to be unclassified and specified it in the text. You can see right here, the first line. This letter is unclassified when separated from the attachment. And he has a lot of notes in here in the margins about how it's classified, how it's not classified. He goes into details about the specific parts of the law that govern classification. This guy did a good job. Maybe that's why it took him 2 weeks to release the complaint in the first place, because this letter is a masterpiece. So, really cool. So, yes, impeachment. So there's a lot of things we could talk about when it comes to the impeachment. First off, will he be removed from office? That was a lot of people's first question. And the answer, of course, is very likely no. Republicans, not big on the whole concept of integrity, if you haven't noticed this. So it'd be surprising if he was. Not impossible, though. There has been a rather surprising report. What's the guy's name? Crap, I forgot his name. But there's a guy who claimed, with inside knowledge, and he's a high up in the political arena, that if the ballot was secret, there would be 30 Republican senators voting against the president, which is twice as many as we need. You need, a little less than twice. I think we need 20. You need a 2/3 majority to remove him from office. Now, Democrats have the House, so there's a good chance he'll be impeached. But we also know Democrats are famously bad at what they do, unfortunately. And they're already talking about limiting the inquiry. There's a lot of things that Trump can be impeached on. To me, I think the most important one is the fact that he has a hotel a block from the White House where foreign governments pay him money directly. That is the most egregious violation of the Emoluments Clause of the Constitution. That, in addition to 50,000 other things, because he never divested from his business interests. Jimmy Carter was forced to sell his peanut farm. And Trump hasn't divested from anything. It's not in a blind trust. It's being managed by his kids, who are also his advisors in the administration. So, not much of a removal there now, is there? It's the most grossly corrupt administration there's ever been, very clearly, and that needs to be a big part of the impeachment proceedings, not just this one thing. So that's a huge one. There's other issues as well that can certainly be brought up. The obstruction of justice from the Mueller report is one. I don't think that should be the only thing either. So when it comes to the possibility of Trump being removed, that I don't think it's likely. Let's not get our hopes up. But what if it did happen? Obviously, Pence would be vice president, but just for a few months. The real thing that matters is the 2020 election. And my concern is Democrats, in like 99% of their entire messaging to the United States for the last 4 years, ever since Trump locked up the primary last time, was Trump is a unique threat to our country. We need to beat him. Well, if we do beat him and he's gone, now what you got? Your messaging, you haven't built any momentum. Like Republicans might actually vote against him because of that. They might realize that it gives them a better chance in 2020. We'll see. I think it does. I think Pence, he's not nearly as charismatic, but he doesn't need to be. Trump's base will vote for him out of spite for the Democrats. We all know that. But he also, I think, will pick up a lot of never Trump Republican types. I've talked to people who are Republicans who say they will vote for any Democrat because they're tired of seeing Trump. But what if Trump's gone? What if it's Pence? So I do think that's a concern, and the way to counter that is to have a message, have a competing vision for America. I think that's something we have to talk about as well. Who has the best vision for America? Oh yeah, ATS. McConnell would never allow a secret ballot for the conviction. That much we damn well know. Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're gonna have your name on the record, but depending on how egregious things turn out after the inquiry, we'll have to wait and see how that affects them politically. Okay. Yes. I did want to go through the some of the main points I've heard about the impeachment, because I've been going the rounds and talking to people, and we'll see if any of them drop by on our video here, because I did offer, but there's a lot of things going on. So obviously part of this whole scandal is the Biden scandal, which is like Merry freaking Christmas to leftists, because it's like, wait, we can take out Biden and Trump with the same scandal? Hallelujah! It's actually, the worst part of this scandal for Biden is that his son was getting paid $50,000 a month to be in a gas company when he has no experience with gas companies. He did graduate from Yale Law School, but he's basically another fail son who's grifting off of his last name, which is very common, and that is corruption. And why do you think the Ukrainian gas company put him on the board anyway? They were hoping for some favoritism. Now, did Biden do anything egregious? Well, I mean, it can look shady, and I wanted to think it was shady, but looking it up, it does appear that Biden's action in advocating for the removal of the attorney general, prosecutor, whoever it was, if anything, hurt him, because that prosecutor was in trouble for not investigating corruption enough. He was in trouble for not investigating Hunter Biden's company enough. So, was he protecting him? Doesn't really seem like it, because if you remove the guy who's not investigating enough, then you could get him replaced with someone who will investigate more. So that's definitely a concern. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that, again, Biden's son is getting paid $50,000 a month to do what? Why is he in there? And he's had other positions like banks, and you can look it up, but Biden's entire family is grifting off of the last name. And whether there's any like illegal corruption there is a separate issue, but the legal corruption's bad enough. And I'm going to be talking about that later because I believe that's the most important thing. Anytime somebody talks about politics, they should talk about that. So we're going to talk about that because I don't want to be a hypocrite. What other points? Read the impeachment. Republicans like to do the whataboutism, and none of the other examples are anything like what happened with this phone call. It's pretty bad. And here's the thing. If you want to argue that he shouldn't be impeached for this, because you're a conservative, you have to understand the can of worms you're opening. Because now every 2-bit congressman can call whatever country they like, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, North Korea, South Korea, UK, and ask them to investigate their political opponents in exchange for some help in the election, or in exchange for voting a certain way on something that comes up that's relevant to that country. Like, things don't have to be black and white in order for it to be prosecutable. Otherwise, we'd never get mob bosses. Mob bosses talk very carefully to avoid liability, but they still get busted because we know what's going on. Like, juries aren't dumb, and our Congress shouldn't play dumb. So, which one should I go through first? All right, let's go through the actual transcript just really quick. So, this is really gross how bad this Ukrainian guy, the Ukrainian president, is brown-nosing Trump. It's sad. It's pathetic that other world leaders are doing this to the president in the first place. But I mean, it just sounds like a fanboy. It's very bad. But yes, very congratulations. Super happy. Now, the context of this call is Congress appropriated $300 and something million for Ukraine, and it's part of ongoing aid packages and treaties, and we're paying them for not pursuing nukes and other stuff like this. So we're paying them. Congress appropriated that money. The president has no right to be holding those funds. It's been appropriated, but he was withholding those funds. Ukraine is going, where the hell's my money? So this is several days. This is, I think it was a couple months, but the money was not there on time. Then this phone call happens. So you have to understand that's obvious subtext to this phone call. Where's the money? So he's trying to drain the swamp. And President Trump goes into a lot of detail about what European countries are not doing for him and how the U.S. does a lot of good things for him. But he finishes by saying, I wouldn't say that it's reciprocal necessarily because things are happening that are not good, but the United States has been very good to Ukraine. So that's some pretty obvious subtext. We've been very good to you, but I don't feel like I'm getting anything back. Yeah, that money that's late. I'm not getting anything. You keep in mind, Ukraine's in a very tough spot with Russia. They have like tanks on their border. They need this military aid. And of course, President Zelensky, oh, you're absolutely right. Not only 100%, 1,000%. Blah, 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 blah. And he finishes by, I think he's trying to guess what Trump wants from him. And considering the fact everybody knows we're run by a military-industrial complex, he finishes by saying, we're ready to buy more javelins, more missiles from the United States. I'm glad to pitch in for your military-industrial complex. Of course, that's not what the president is talking about. He doesn't care anything about the country, national interests. He's concerned about his own political future. So I would like you to do us a favor, which is hilarious because Chris Christie, hours before this transcript dropped, said on live TV that it's probably etc., but it would be bad if the president said, I need a favor done. And then those words are in the transcript. They keep shooting themselves in the foot and then finding out that that's actually the case. It happened with somebody else too. But yes, so he starts with this CrowdStrike server, which is a right-wing conspiracy theory. Like, there's this conspiracy theory that this server, that it would incriminate different people than Russia, the DNC's been hiding, and CrowdStrike has it, and it's in Ukraine somewhere. It's ridiculous. There's no evidence for it. It's a conspiracy theory. And here's the president asking other world leaders about it. Which, okay, whatever, I guess. That's the world we live in. And there's a lot of things that went on. You've surrounded some of the same people. I would like to have the Attorney General call you or your people and get to the bottom of it. So Robert Mueller started in Ukraine. Very important for me. Open for future cooperation, blah, blah, blah. I guarantee the president of Ukraine that all the investigations will be done openly and candidly. That I can assure you. Good, says Donald Trump. Because I heard you had a prosecutor who was very good and he was shut down, and that's really unfair. Now, if you search the name of this particular prosecutor, which will come right up in any Google search, you probably don't even need to put his name in, which I forget. If you search his name, there was a very large movement to get him removed. There was protests in the streets of Ukraine. He was known to be corrupt. So the fact him pretending he was doing a good job is very far from the truth. Yeah. Anyway. Whistleblower. Nope. Transcript. Pop up. No, thank you. God, I hate CNN. Okay. And that's really unfair. A lot of people are talking about that, the way they shut your very good prosecutor down. So apparently Trump likes corrupt people. That's not a big surprise. Talk to my personal attorney, Mr. Giuliani, and the Attorney General. So he's not only using his personal lawyer in a call with a world leader, but also the Attorney General. He knows what's happening, and he's a very capable guy. And then, the bombshell, there's a lot of talk about Biden's son. That Biden stopped the prosecution, and a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do with the Attorney General would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, it sounds horrible to me. Biden did brag that he got their chief prosecutor or Attorney General or whatever they call him over there fired because he was known to be corrupt. He withheld aid so that they would fire him. But remember, there was protests against him because he was so bad at investigating corruption. So whether this is to protect his son or not seems pretty iffy. Regardless, his son shouldn't have been working there. That's corruption in and of itself. So, of course, the president of Ukraine is, oh yes, sir, absolutely. Glad to help with that. So, gonna give him a call. So, yeah, that's obviously really bad. Yeah. No, it does seem like Biden being targeted gets Pelosi on that. You know, I was wondering because it sounded to like the White House released. Sorry about that. The White House released the transcript, and I was like, why would they do that? And I don't know if that was a situation Donald Trump had control over, but it did make. It makes me wonder if Trump has bought into the establishment wisdom. The reason Pelosi hasn't started impeachment inquiries before now is because the establishment all over the place thinks it would hurt Democrats to have an impeachment hearings. And they're using the evidence that it seemed to hurt Republicans when they impeached Clinton. So it hurt them in the next election. So considering that, I wonder if Trump release this to try to force Democrats into impeaching him. That seems like the kind of thing he would do. And it wouldn't take a genius, because he's not. He's pretty incompetent. But it's certainly possible he bought into the establishment wisdom that it would help him, and he released the transcript to try to prod them along. It's also possible that the whistleblower did such a good job writing the letter, they couldn't hold it back anymore. There's other situations going on here. One of the interesting things is Dan Coates, who is, I believe, he was like the director of intelligence or something. He was high up in the cabinet in national security issues. And he resigned 3 days after this phone call. So that was 2 months ago he resigned. But it was 3 days after this phone call. And nobody knew there was any dots between them, but does not seem coincidental to me. I think he heard about the phone call and was like, I ain't going down with this shit. And he bounced. Oh yeah, I should have been clear. The transcript is not like a full transcript. It's the White House's version of notes of the call. They had every opportunity to edit this. So disconnected from everything, and they're putting Trump's conversations with world leaders on there ever since their calls were leaked with the call with Mexico and Australia. So the most transparent administration ever is what Donald Trump promised. Remember that. And they're hiding all this, which is awesome. But I did want to scan through this, the actual whistleblower complaint, which it's so awesome that he managed to write this in such a way that they couldn't classify it by being so specific. So we can actually read it. And over this does seem like it applies to more than just this one phone call everyone's talking about. Because it says, over the past 4 months, more than half a dozen U.S. officials have informed me of various facts related to this effort. The information provided here is collected in the course of business. It's not a direct witness, but he's heard a lot of officials, and they're all consistent with one another. I am concerned that these actions pose risk to U.S. national security. I know, right? It's so inconsistent. So July 25th presidential phone call, which we already went through, but he's clearly holding back aid in exchange, and he's going to release that aid in exchange for a personal favor investigating his personal opposition. Ugh. The efforts to restrict access to records related to the call. In the days following, I learned from multiple U.S. officials that White House officials had intervened to lock down all records of the phone call, especially the official word-for-word transcript, the one that's not been released, that was produced as is customary by the White House Situation Room. This set of actions underscored that the White House officials understood the gravity of what had transpired in the call, because you realize this isn't normal behavior. When the world leaders have conversations with each other, transcripts get passed around to the entire cabinet so they're all aware of what's going on, what's said, because they all have to reflect what the president says. They're all part of the same cabinet. They need to be on the same page. But that didn't happen, and that's not happening with a lot of these calls. There was another headline about calls with Saudi Arabia during the time that the journalist was killed, and calls with Putin that also were not distributed to the cabinet and seem to be hidden on the server as well. So hopefully, with an impeachment inquiry, they can get a subpoena and get those records before they're destroyed or something. I'm going to just read this whole thing and study it. It's good stuff. Okay, so ATS. What points have you heard about the impeachment? Like, have you discussed this with anybody on the right wing? Like, how have you seen how they're defending it? I did want to kind of address the talking points portion of it as well. So, if you have any thoughts on that, definitely pipe in. Okay, that's amazing. Amazing. So, I feel like every time anybody talks about politics, it's really important to frame what should be the most obvious fact in the world and the most important fact of the world. And that should be first and foremost on every single political conversation. And like, if you're interviewed by a news station, this should be brought up. Like, this needs to be the frame we talk about politics through. American politicians are gaslighting you. That is a known fact. So anytime you're talking about American politicians, we have to be doing it from the frame that we know they aren't honest. We know they are gaslighting us. Gaslighting. They're acting like they're your representative. They campaign for your vote, and then they get into office and immediately sell out to the oligarchs. This isn't like a leftist talking point. This isn't hyperbole. This is an empirical fact. This is actually, I grew up very conservative. I think I've talked about that before. And like, listened to Rush Limbaugh hours a day, my whole childhood and teen years. Very conservative. One of the biggest things that nudged me into the left wing was this study right here. This came out in 2014, and what school was it? Was it MIT, I want to say? Or Princeton? No, I think it was Princeton. But they did a study documenting the influence of different groups within the United States, and determined that the U.S. is an oligarchy, not a democracy. An oligarchy is where rich people control the country instead of the people or a king or parliament or anything else. It's rich people. That's all you need. If you're rich, you have influence in the country, disproportionate influence. So this covers it very well. And if you just Google U.S. is an oligarchy, it's really easy to find this, or the other one that comes up is a BBC article on the same thing, but it includes a link to the original study. So this comes up in conversation quite a bit, and these are the first two articles if you Google U.S. is an oligarchy. And like I said, I was conservative. I grew up loving this country, deeply patriotic, believed in the Constitution. I believed all these right-wing talking points about the country and the founding fathers, and everything's awesome, and the Constitution was awesome, and there's elements of that still hold true. So, coming from that standpoint where I deeply believed in the American ideal, when I saw this headline, that was astonishing to me. I didn't know how to deal with it. And I read about it, and then I was like, why is nobody talking about this? Why have I never heard this? And then looking into it, people on the left are talking about it, but they're the only ones who are. And here's why that matters. If the U.S. is controlled by wealthy people, then any problems we have, because I've always wondered, this channel is about problem solving. I have always wondered why we have problems that seem so easily solvable and we haven't just solved them yet. Well, this is why. If the solution to a problem goes against the will of the wealthy people who run this country, it doesn't happen. So we cannot solve any of the major problems in this country if we don't solve the corruption first. The U.S. should not be an oligarchy. It's supposed to be a government of, by, and for the people, and that is extremely important. So I did like this article. It gave some nice graphs on it. So this was an extensive study. It was peer-reviewed, all this other stuff. They documented who has the most influence within society. So this is, it's not who gets who elected, because that's not, who gets elected isn't what changes anything. What changes things are what policies are passed. So which groups are most successful at getting their policies passed. And the top 10%, the wealthy, are 78% successful in getting what they want passed. These add up to over 100% because there is some overlap between them. Business groups, 43%. Interest groups, 24%. And the people this is supposed to be a government of, by, and for, 5%. That's bad. So this is what different forms of government should look like. Democracy would be like that. This is an oligarchy. We're actually worse than that. We're like a pretty bad oligarchy. Business dominated, interest group dominated. They also looked at the influence of two different types of interest groups. They're looking at interest groups that, I think it's here. They looked at interest groups that represent a large amount of voters, and they looked at interest groups that represent large amounts of money. And the ones that represented the money were far more effective at getting their policies passed. This is, like, what we're looking at is the death of our democracy. And it's already happened. We've already lost this influence. And how it's happened, we still have elections. So how is it we have all these elections with free choice and this is still happening? It's because they are gaslighting us. So Republicans use social issues like guns and abortion that oligarchs don't care about, and they use those to get voters, and then they sell out immediately. Plus, a lot of their talking points directly help oligarchs as well. It's all about cutting regulation and cutting taxes. It's not regulations that you want eliminated. It's the regulations they want eliminated. It's not your taxes so much as their taxes. But all the talking points feed into what the oligarchs want. Democrats, on the other hand, they gaslight because they run on platitudes. Pay attention to the launch videos. Look at every single Democratic candidate. And virtually every one of them, you'll watch the whole launch video and they won't name one policy. That it's common with Democratic ads, speeches. They're not big on policy typically. Fortunately, Bernie's inclusion in this primary has kind of forced people to talk about policy more, which is a good thing. But if you look historically, they tend to be very vague. They run on platitudes. I'm for good things, against bad things. They avoid policy promises. And then when they get in office, they immediately sell out. That's one way they gaslight us. Another way they gaslight us is by lying. They say, I'm for Medicare for all. I'm for this. I'm for that. And then they get into office and, oh man, we just couldn't get it through. We had to compromise to make it happen. So Barack Obama compromised so hard on Obamacare that he presented Congress with literally the Republican healthcare plan and got 0 Republican votes. So bipartisanship does not work. Do not buy into that. Yeah, a lot of right-wingers have a deep persecution complex, and they use the fact that the government doesn't work in your favor to push for smaller government. But exactly, nature abhors a vacuum. The less power the government has, the more power oligarchs have. Oligarchs already have most of the power. We can't give them more. It's better to have a government of, by, and for the people than oligarchs you have no say in. So let's take back control of our country instead of giving it up to oligarchs even more. And let's frame every conversation through this lens of the fact that politicians are gaslighting us. So like this leads into Elizabeth Warren. I've always liked Elizabeth Warren. I donated to the PAC that was trying to get her to run for president in 2016 before Bernie announced. I was a huge fan. She stood up to banks. She fought for the people in pretty compelling ways. That said, she is no Bernie Sanders. She has not shown the type of integrity that we need. Because given the fact that nothing happens that helps the people because of the fact that they're gaslighting us and they're corrupt and they're selling out to oligarchs, because of that, the most important thing we need to look for is integrity. So that's the point too here. And that I don't know why more people don't talk about this. It doesn't matter what politicians say. What matters is, are they going to fight for it? FDR, in order to pass his bold plans that helped shape the welfare net we enjoy and helped create the middle class with infrastructure spending and whatnot like that, in order to get it passed, he needed to sit down and threaten people on his own side. He needed to sit down, and senators and Congress people are dragging their feet. He needed to, you got to sit down, you got to tell them, hey, you vote for this bill or I'm going to go to your home district and I'm going to campaign for your primary opponent and you will not be a politician anymore. You will get fired. And nobody else does. Look at how friendly Elizabeth Warren is to the establishment. She says things like, oh, we're all looking for the same end goal when it comes to healthcare. And, Medicare for all, Medicare for America. We all want the same thing. We all want healthcare for everybody. No, Warren, that's not true. Every politician who is for anything but single payer is doing that to protect private insurance companies. That is the only reason. Single payer is proven to work. It is the most financially, it makes the most sense financially. It makes the most sense from our, imagine, anyone who's dealt with insurance knows it's a pain in the behind. Every time you go to the doctor, there's paperwork. If there's issues, you have to be on the line with insurance all the time, pleading your case. If it was single payer, you go there, get treated, you leave. There's no paperwork, there's no phone calls. You're just covered because it's your human right. How awesome would that be? And it costs less. The United States pays far more than anybody else. So anybody for anything except single payer healthcare is gaslighting us. We do not need private health insurance. They are basically mafia bosses between you and your healthcare. They don't do anything for you except deny you care whenever they can. That's how they make profit. So the fact that Elizabeth Warren isn't willing to call people out for that tells you a lot about whether she would fight those same Democrats to get the votes we need on the nice policies she has. She has a lot of nice policies, but she won't fight for them. And we need a fighter. Now, the third thing was the stakes of this election. This was in some news. You might have seen it. But there is a study done that if we don't take dramatic action on climate change now, 6 billion people will die. Now, I was like, that's hyperbolic. I have a high bullshit meter, and I did not... I millions maybe, but 6 billion. The population of the planet's, 7.5 billion, something like that? Well, it's talking about life and death in a world 4 degrees Celsius hotter. It's about 7 degrees Fahrenheit hotter. That's on average. And I believe that can happen within, 50 years, 100 years? And doomed by 2100. So if the temperature rises that much, which it's on track to do, the average temperature goes up by 7 degrees Fahrenheit, which means spikes can go up more than that. You can have areas have record highs 10, 15 degrees hotter than they are now. That makes places uninhabitable. Like, mammals will not be able to survive without air conditioning. So now you have massive migration from places trying to escape. We have famine because a lot of the places where we grow food wouldn't be able to grow food anymore. And the biggest thing is all of this chaos will cause wars over resources and will most likely trigger a World War III. And World War III would be the end of civilization, because in a world war between superpowers, failure is not an option. They will do absolutely anything they can, and we have enough nukes to churn most of our cities to glass. So it's kind of important that we solve the problem timely enough fashion that we don't have to resort to those kind of things. So super important. The stakes have never been higher. So climate change is part of it. The other part is the fascism that is taking place all over the country. Oh, crap. Yeah, I want to talk about climate change more. How are we doing? Only 40 minutes in. Okay, so I'd like to make a few points on climate change too. Uh, One of the points that I've been making about Elizabeth Warren, anytime somebody says something about Elizabeth Warren, I say Elizabeth Warren would be the best president we've had in half a century, if not more. She might be the best president we've ever had. That's great. She's not good enough. And that's the problem. We are on the edge of a precipice, and we need somebody with the integrity to fight for what we need to happen. And she is not that person. She's strong, but she's not that good. Like I was tempted to compare her to FDR, but FDR did not pass those things in a vacuum. That's what ATS is saying, if I'm not mistaken, because FDR passed the New Deal and things like that in reaction to a massive movement across the country. He was forced to. There was riots, protests, unions, fascist, socialist, things were blown up all over the place, and he needed to do something to restore order to the country. And he did some basic socialist policies, like just the basics to kind of get some people covered. And that was enough to derail it. But it's not like he was just believed in this stuff and passed it on his own. He was forced to. Bernie Sanders will amp up that kind of response to pressure Congress people. He doesn't need to be pressured himself, which is outstanding. I don't think there's ever been a U.S. president who would be so for the people that wouldn't need to be pressured. But we would still need to be fighting for Congress, because there's a lot of people in Congress who are corrupt and will not want to pass stuff. But Elizabeth Warren, she would need to be pressured. And that would make it a lot harder. She would use the bully pulpit to try to calm people down without getting the action we need. So it's never been more important to choose a politician who we can trust to ignore the money and interest and, in fact, welcome their hate. It's never been more important that we donate, volunteer, and vote for Bernie Sanders. I can't think of any candidate for president, certainly in my lifetime, but like even in history, that had the opportunity we have here. This is unparalleled. Bernie Sanders is so far outside the establishment. They all agree, right and left, CNN, MSNBC, Washington Post, New York Times, Fox News, Breitbart, like, you name it. They all hate Bernie. Why? Because he's on our side. Every single policy he's put forth is actually popular with the majority of the country. That's why he's called a populist. Medicare for all is overwhelmingly popular. Living wage, free college. Who wouldn't want these things? These are proven policies that work all over the world. There's no reasonable argument we can make against them. But they deny him coverage. They post negative stuff about him because they're scared of him. And he has an honest chance. He has 1 million donors. He has more donors than anybody else. Twice as much as anybody else. Donald Trump is in second. So, which brings me to another point. Go to a Bernie Sanders rally and a Donald Trump rally, and then any other candidate's rally. There is not a tenth of the energy that Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders has at any other rally. So if we're going to win, we need the guy that has the proven track record of excitement and passion. And the number one argument made against Bernie Sanders is he's not electable. That's BS, and we all know that. How do we know that? Empirically, look at the polls. He has been beating Trump head-to-head for 4 years straight in every head-to-head poll, almost every head-to-head poll. A couple outliers. But he was beating Trump by more than Hillary was. So if he's supposedly unelectable, who do you think they're polling? This is the most insane talking point. He's beating Trump in the polls. What do you mean he's unelectable? The idea that he's some fringe candidate that can't possibly... Another talking point against him I've heard is he lost 2016. So why should he get another chance? Which is just breathtakingly blind to the context going on here. Nobody had heard about Bernie Sanders before he, like outside of Vermont maybe, and a few like left-wingers, but like most people never heard of him before he announced for president in 2015. And he won 46% of the electoral votes. 46% against the most powerful political machine this country might have ever seen, the Hillary Clinton campaign. They owned the DNC. If you can look up all kinds of records, like the DNC owed them money. They had an arrangement where the DNC could not release a press release without putting it through the Hillary Clinton Foundation, to Hillary Clinton's campaign. So the DNC was acting as an arm of the Hillary Clinton campaign, and he still got 46%. And you want to ignore that context? Here's the thing: there's no Hillary Clinton this time. It's much more fractured support. Biden has been slipping since he announced. No one's really talking about that. It's been slow. He still has a solid lead, but he's been slowly but surely slipping. And if once he loses the first or second state, his number one selling point that he can beat Trump starts to crack, because now he's a loser. He's not a winner. And the whole reason people are supporting him is because they think he can win. And here's the thing: Bernie Sanders is polling way ahead of everybody in New Hampshire, which is the first real primary state. Iowa's a caucus. So when he wins New Hampshire, it doesn't look so good. I believe he's also tied for California, which is much earlier in the cycle now. It's in March. If he wins California, like, this is a real opportunity we have here that we've never had before. And we all need to jump on board and fight for him. Did want to show off this shirt. It's obviously Bernie Sanders shirt from 2016. Yeah. So retro. Been with Bernie since the beginning, and I cannot imagine. I would love to see anybody try to make an argument for why we should vote for anybody other than Bernie Sanders. I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, leftist. Don't care. Give me one reason why we shouldn't be fighting for Bernie Sanders. I would love to hear it. I've heard a lot. Get on the side of humanity's survival or get the fuck out of the way. This is an existential threat. So that was just talking about climate change, but the other existential threat to humanity is fascism itself. Fascism is rising all over the world. Trump is very fascist. There was a rumor, it was actually in court documents, not a rumor, but his ex-wife claimed that he kept a book of Hitler's speeches on his bedside table for years. That's his ex-wife. Is it true? I never really 100% bought into it, but the fact that, like, everything he does, you could not steer this country to fascism more effectively than he is if you tried. If you understand what fascism is. And the number one thing about fascism, my values as a leftist is that I want to maximize well-being for humanity from behind the veil of ignorance, which means no matter what position you're born into, no matter what your status in life, we should make our policies such that if we were to switch places with other people, just some random person, the policies would still be to my best interest. So that's my philosophy as a leftist. Fascism is all about maximizing the well-being of your tribe. It's all about the white people. It's all about a racial group or a tribal group of some sort. And they don't care about, there's no other ideology inherent to it. They will rip off any other ideology they can to get their ends. They will use democracy until they have enough power to eliminate democracy. They will use the freedom of speech until they have enough power to eliminate freedom of speech. They do not care. And it's exploding all over the place. Trump has referenced it. He's blown a whole lot of dog whistles. He literally putting people in cages. The whole thing at the border is just like if that's not fascism, don't know what is. But here's the thing: if the United States became a full-blown fascist country, and they like actually took over the country, we are the world's sole superpower. We have more military than anybody. We would. There's other countries also going fascist, and it would really mess up the world. It would very likely lead to World War III. And if not World War III, then we would certainly not solve our other problems like climate change, because fascist countries aren't going to work well together. In order to become a fascist country, you're fear-mongering minorities. And these minorities come from other countries. You're not going to have great relations with those countries you're fear-mongering the people of. So there's no way you're going to be able to work together on global issues. Trump had a speech at the UN this week where he said he was talking about how we need globalists are the bad guys and nationalists are the good guys, basically. Yep. We got to get him in. And I have to say, let's imagine Bernie Sanders wins the nomination. Awesome. I and a lot of other people think he would breeze to a general election win. He is a populist. His message is popular with the people. The media have been ignoring him. They've been being negative about him. But when there's only two candidates in the race, you can't ignore him anymore. He would have the bully pulpit he's been looking for. He would get his message out there, and he would make Trump look so bad. My point in 2016 about him being electable still stands true, which is Trump is an expert mudslinger. He was involved in the WWE, reality television. He knows how to throw mud. He knows how to get personal. He knows how to get you down to his level. And he's really good at that. And Hillary made the mistake of trying to get down to his level, and she looked like an idiot. Every other Democratic candidate seems to be ready to jump in there down at his level. Biden's explicitly said things like, I'd like to take him down, but, back behind the shed and, show him who's boss, or, all this kind of old man fighting kind of stuff. Bernie is the only one who doesn't focus on the person. He's talked about Trump. You can't not. But his primary message is a vision for America that is empirically validated to maximize the well-being of all of us. That's his number one point. So he's going to get up there in a debate with Donald Trump, and he's going to talk about policy, policy, policy. This is how this helps you as an American sitting at home. This is how this helps you. And Trump's going to try to throw insults, and he's going to ignore it and just keep talking like the adult. And that makes Trump look like a child. Because Trump can't talk about policies intelligently to save his life. Bernie would make Trump look so bad. And I hope I live to see it. But what happens if Bernie Sanders wins in November? Well, that's an uncomfortable topic to me, because Trump's been building a foundation for something for a long time. In 2016, he was talking about the election being rigged. He's been talking about that ever since. He's been talking about illegals voting. Everyone knows, like, this whole Russia thing, that the Russians rigged our election, or tried to, and they interfered, they influenced. And yet, Republicans haven't fixed anything. They've been blocking every attempt to secure our elections. Almost as if they're intentionally leaving a hole so that if they lose, they can then argue that it was foreign influence. So my concern is if they lose, they're going to stay in office pending an investigation that never ends. there's two main reasons I think this is so plausible. A, uh, Trump knows that if he leaves office, he'll be indicted. The only reason he hasn't been is because the Justice Department has a memo that says that they can't indict a sitting president. There's a lot of investigations ongoing from in New York, especially, that would take him down. His finances are a mess. He's a criminal. He's been in bed with a whole lot of criminals. He's going to go to prison if he gets out of office. So he has a really high vested interest in not leaving office. Why would he leave office? The other thing, and this is the more important because he's one crazy person, the reason it might be successful is because his base knows that if they lose 2020, they might not win again for a very long time. It's been a major talking point for ages that if the right loses Texas, they might not win again ever, like for decades, until they change their entire party platform. And that doesn't make them happy. It's a mainstream talking point, which is also fascistic. It's a fascist talking point, but white genocide, the replacement of our people, like this kind of coded language. This coded language is happening on Fox News. It's mainstream conservatives now. It's not just the alt-right. It is the right. The more mainstream ones code it better, but they all talk about demographic shifts. They all talk about how they're being replaced. They know because of the demographic shift that's happening, they are going to lose. So if they lose, and they lose big, I think they would back fascism rather than lose power, because they believe in the things that they fight for. They believe in, the anti-abortion thing and guns, and it's their tribal identity. A lot of it's Christians, evangelical Christians, and they feel persecuted by liberals and freedom of religion type things, and they will fight for that. Oh, did he? Mitch finally caved and allowed the Senate to vote for election security. Yeah, I'm sure it's too late to implement it. But it really looks like they're intentionally leaving it open. And some people, they might be trying to leave the election insecured so that people can come in and influence it. That's obviously one possibility. Another possibility is that they want an excuse to claim it was rigged if they lose. So I'm quite concerned about that. Dorian, hey, how's it going, buddy? Oh yeah, no, it's true. It's ever since the Southern strategy, it's been slowly raising the temperature on that idling fascism. And it's a huge concern, especially when we need to do something about climate change. So, did want to talk about Greta Thunberg. Thunberg. I think it's Thunberg, not Thunberg. She's been taking off all over my social media, and obviously the right wing attacks her all kinds of ways. And I just wanted to make some points on rhetoric and how we deal with that. A lot of the arguments against her are arguing that she shouldn't be the one speaking. Like, she doesn't have authority, she doesn't have expertise. Like, why is this child telling us what to do? Blah 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 blah. And it does feed into the idea that the entire reason conservatives have a problem with her is it's upending their version of hierarchy. Because hierarchy is very important to conservatives. It starts with the Christian idea that it's very hierarchical. It's pastor and husband and mother, and it's like this hierarchy through the family and through society. And all of a sudden, here's this little girl telling us what to do. But my favorite counter is. Conservatives like to say that the most fundamental human right is self-defense. And they also argue that even if you're wrong, if you think it's self-defense, it's still justified. If you have a legitimate reason to think you're defending yourself, then pretty much anything you do is justified because of how fundamental the right to self-defense is. Well, whether she's right or wrong, she has the right to defend her future. And fuck you if you think otherwise, you're a hypocrite, basically. Another thing is that she's not a scientist. We should listen to the scientists. Well, you don't listen to the scientists. 99% of the scientists I actually don't like when people say that. All of the scientists agree with anthropogenic climate change, that humans are causing climate change. The people who aren't agreeing it's their individual opinion. They don't have a scientific opinion that contradicts climate change because there is no evidence to back that up, and science is something that is evidence-based. Yeah, calling him mentally ill. Hey, Chloe. It was beautiful to see that idiot smack down on Fox News. I saw that clip. The surprising part was that they apologized. But there's a lot of interesting news coming out of Fox News. They are panicking over this whole Trump thing. Apparently, the management of Fox News is extremely concerned about what they would do in a post-Trump world because they're so focused on propping up Trump, and Trump's been so good for their little business empire. They're very concerned what they would do in a post-Trump world. So that's lovely. Greta is not mentally ill. She has Asperger's, which is it's a different mental state. It's not mental illness. Mental illness is when you can't function in society. If you look up in the dictionary, it's something that keeps you from functioning sometimes. And Asperger's is just a different way of looking at the world, a different way of reacting. It's on the autism spectrum, which a lot of people are, and a lot of people function. It's a different type of person. It's not mentally ill. And again, whether she is or not, she has the right to defend her future. And she doesn't need any special expertise to do so, because she's talking about something that has been settled science for 50 fucking years. I mean, you can look that up. Exxon, and this is the most amazing thing to me. I really think we need another version of the Nuremberg trials for this, because this is probably the worst crime in human history. Exxon knew exactly. They had climate models so accurate when I was born in 1982 that they predicted the current CO2 levels in the stratosphere, and they predicted our temperature. They knew climate change was caused by fossil fuels, and they knew exactly how it all worked. And instead of doing something about it, they funded climate denial. Like, it's one thing if you're like, well, we're an oil company. Sucks that apparently oil's heating up the world, but, we need energy, so we'll just not say anything about it. Okay. But funding climate denial when you know that's not true, when you know it's damaging the entire planet and risking the future of humanity, these people gotta go, man. There should be international trials to hold people like that accountable. Not just from Exxon. I'm sure there's a lot of other companies that did the same thing. Oh, speaking of scientists, somebody in my family posted, I have to see these in my social media all the time because, again, I came from a conservative background. Most of them still are. Posted an article about how after Greta's speech, 500 scientists sent a letter to the UN basically saying that you have to stop acting like climate change is an emergency because it's not. And 500 people, scientists that are either climatologists or closely related therein. That's what the press releases look it up. If you Google it, which we can do real quick, 500 scientists, right? Letter to UN. there's going to be a whole lot of right-wing sites, and all of these press releases, Breitbart, all kinds of place stuff, they all say 500 scientists. Well, if we value truth, if truth matters, if we want to learn critical thinking, you don't accept claims on their face. You have to investigate it. So I did investigate this. I found the letter. It's not hard. Most of them have a link to it. The letter has 14 signatures. 14, not 500. There is no... I looked. There's no way you can find any other names. So where's the 500 coming from? Like, was that their goal, but they fell short by 483 or whatever? The other thing is, most of them... I went through, I think it was the first, 8 or 10 before I finally found one who was actually a climatologist and had actually published research in that field. Like, the other ones, one worked for Shell. One had a 40-year career in the coal industry. Like, some of them had degrees in physics. A couple of them, it's just a name. There's no letters after the name. There's no, you can't find them on the internet. It's just like first and last name, and they're not on the internet. And there's no school they work at. There's no paper they published. There's no credentials. Like, you have 14 people, and you can't even make a good case for them. So yes, there are virtually no scientists who disagree, and the ones that do make a terrible point. Like, the one that's published research, all of his research has been clearly and effectively debunked by the rest of the scientific community. Oh yeah, the climate change deniers studied the success of tobacco companies, and they studied how... See, you don't have to prove the science wrong. You just have to put out enough talking points on the other side that it seems like you can have a reasonable disagreement. It seems like there's two sides to the conversation. The media doesn't like to look biased, so if they talk about one side, they always bring on the other side. But there is no two sides here, and yet the media is always bringing on both sides, even with climate change. Even lately, they still do this. And they shouldn't. Like, if something's clearly true, you don't need to present both sides. We don't need to present both sides if we're talking about the flat earth. We can just be like, it's not flat. But with climate change, they bring on both sides. And it's pathetic. So, Chloe, Dorian, ADS, you guys have any arguments, any points that you like to make in regards to any of these topics, or points that you've seen made? If you want to present a devil's advocate position, I love rhetoric. I love countering specific points, specific arguments, and love to talk about that. If you have some talking points, we can discuss that's related to any of these issues. So definitely put those in chat if you have them, and I'll come back. Wanted to, speaking of rhetoric and making a case, my full-time hobby for the last decade, basically, has been debating online. It's rhetoric, it's countering bad reason, it's philosophy. I like to argue, like to debate. Pretty good at it now. And I try to make things as absolutely simple as possible, because that's much more effective rhetorically. You have to understand, people are willfully ignorant. They don't want to understand. But if you make it so simple that they can't not understand, it can actually start cracking their shell of certainty that they have protecting their worldview. And that's what I'm trying to do with this climate argument. I'm going to go through very quickly. Oh, that's fine, Chloe. Just anything you got, anything you want to add. If you've disagreed with anything I've said, if you have any points to be made, if you've any counterpoints you've heard from conservatives that you'd like to talk about the most effective rebuttals for, I love doing that. So anyway, this is the climate. I keep a note file There's a notes program in for Apple for iPhones that you can get to on. It's in the cloud, so you can get to it from your phone, tablet, from any computer in your favorites. It's very easy to access, and I have a whole bunch of my favorite arguments in there. So things that come up often, I can copy paste things from. Makes you able to be very effective online. This is my climate case. So, yes, Dorian, the impeachment discussion. I didn't talk about the fact that it might be pointless if the Senate won't convict. So, last time this came up, I was in a thread and they were arguing about this. And my point is, the impeachment's begun. It's too late to argue about it. Like one of the biggest ways the impeachment will hurt us is division, and arguing about whether it should or shouldn't happen when it's happening is kind of pointless to me. It's happening, but will it hurt us or help us? Honestly, I think this country is so divided that virtually nothing's going to swing the needle very much. Least of all, the impeachment. Most people who are voting against Trump aren't going to be swayed by it. Most people who are voting for Trump aren't going to be swayed by it. So, given that I don't think it's going to change things very much, I think we might as well do what's right. He broke the law. We should try to hold him accountable. Secondly, there's rumors of a lot of pissed off Republican senators. So there's a possibility he actually gets removed. If there's enough political pressure, if the results of the inquiry look bad enough, if the polls keep shifting, I looked up the polling. I wonder if I can find it again on the fly. But the polls on impeachment, they went up 12 points in just the last few days since this stuff came out. And not only did it go up 12 points, but they've surpassed where they were. They peaked during when the Mueller report was released. They peaked. Well, they've gone past that at this point. That's the one I wanted. So 47% is the highest one. That's support for impeachment. Whereas the highest it was post-Mueller report was 42%. Post-testimony was 43%. So we can see it's swinging up. And if that continues, there's a lot of Republicans in swing states that are uncomfortable with their re-election chances, and they're going to start flaking away from him if he gets too hot. And once a couple leave, there could be more. So there is a chance he could actually get removed. I'm not super optimistic, but it's possible. It's a good point, Anarchist. Speaking of support, Hitler never had more than 38% support in Germany. And he took over the country and almost the world. So when I look at Trump's approval numbers and how they're always 38 to low 40s, no matter what happens, again, if you think it hasn't crossed his mind to have a fascist coup, I don't know why you would think that. The argument that it will invigorate Trump's base, that actually holds true even if we're successful in removing him from office. And I did talk about that because I'm concerned what happens if we do remove him from office, because I feel like nobody's giving that serious thought. Almost everyone who's talking about the impeachment is saying there's no way he'll get removed because of the Senate, which is quite likely true. But what if he does? Now you're a few months before the election. Obviously, it'll be Pence because they won't have time for, serious primaries. And Trump will be gone. And the Democrats' entire message for 4 years has been Trump's uniquely bad. He's not like these other Republicans that we're used to. No, he's uniquely bad. He's a fascist, which is true. And he is uniquely bad. But that's been their only message. They don't sell their vision of America. They don't tell working people, here's what we're going to do for you. They just say Trump bad. This is how the establishment has been messaging. So if Trump's not on the ballot, you still get all the pissed off Trump voters. They're 100% going to vote against the Democrats, obviously. You also, Pence would gain some never Trump Republicans. Plus, you'd have a lot of liberals and leftists who don't show up to vote because Trump's not there. And they just, it's not as important to them. They forget that day or what have you. Like, turnout to the polls will be lower without Trump on the ballot, I think, which helps Republicans and hurts Democrats. So if Bernie Sanders wins the nomination, none of this matters. He's really good at messaging. He's really good at selling his vision. I'm confident he will win no matter who is on the ballot. But if it's anybody else, I would be nervous if Trump was actually removed. Now, it would still be a good thing. We do have to hold politicians accountable. So, absolutely. Oh, my word. Oh. If you came into this stream recently, you might have missed the beginning part of my political rant, which is that anyone who's talking about politics who isn't regularly talking about the fact that both parties are gaslighting us is doing a disservice. So let's keep in mind that we are being gaslit by politicians. This is a fact. We looked up the study that proved, I believe it was a Princeton study, that proved that the U.S. is an oligarchy. Do I still have that up here? Ah, yes. So, nice little chart here. Who holds the reins of democracy? This chart represents which groups get their policies passed. Because who gets elected doesn't change anything. It's what policies get passed, what executive orders get passed, what stuff actually happens. And the top 10% wealthy get their way 78% of the time. Business groups 43%, interest groups 24%, and the people who the government is supposed to be of, by, and for get their way 5% of the time. This is from 2014, and it's only been getting worse. That's the frame, the perspective we need to look at politics through. Now, when you start looking at politics through that frame, you realize these rich people are donating to both Democrats and Republicans. So they're putting their hand on the scale here. But they're not picking strong Democrats. They're intentionally picking weak Democrats. Democrats who talk about bipartisanship. Democrats who talk about compromise. Democrats who will do what they want when they get that phone call. And that's who they get. And that's why people like Pelosi are so fucking weak. And the rest of the establishment and much of the Democratic Congress, they are quite weak. And the idea of limiting the impeachment inquiry to just the Ukrainian stuff, it's like they're trying to shoot themselves in the foot. And they might be. They might be. Because Democrats are really, really good at snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, one might say. And Dorian, the GOP senator situation is a prisoner's dilemma. So Trump, we looked through, we kind of scanned through the transcript of the call with the Ukrainian president, and it is disgusting how much Trump requires people to brown nose him. He makes people kiss the ring. He is a dictator. He is definitely an authoritarian. He bullies people, and you have to be 100% loyal, or he will kill you. Like, maybe not literally, maybe literally. Who knows? But he definitely, his base is so rabidly loyal that if somebody speaks against him and he speaks bad of them, they lose their election. Like, he has a lot of sway. So a lot of Senate Republicans, we have good reason to think a whole lot of them hate Trump. But if they're vocal about it, they will lose their election because he has a very loyal base. So I think it is a prisoner's dilemma. And if it was a secret ballot, there's no question in my mind Trump would get removed from office. But it won't be a secret ballot because, of course, we have Moscow Mitch running the Senate, so that's not going to happen. However, given how much they do hate him, it could happen with enough pressure, with enough. If the polls keep rising on impeachment, and there's pressure in their home districts, you could have enough senators flip. It's possible. It's not. I wouldn't say it's probable, but it's possible. Well, President Pelosi would be just fine with me because it would only be for a few months. That's the thing. Like this, by the time this all happened, would be pretty close to the election, and it wouldn't cancel the election, so there'd still be an election, and hopefully we get Bernie Sanders in there after 5 months of Nancy Pelosi. That would be fine. But I don't think Trump. I was thinking about the fact of Trump is such a petulant child. I would not be surprised if he did not want Pence to benefit from his misfortune. And it would not surprise me at all if he fired Pence and put somebody else, some Trump fanboy loyalist in his place before like the final gavel comes down and he's removed from office. But anyway, we'll see what happens. I have noticed from the beginning Pence has been keeping his nose clean. We all didn't forget who Pence is, right? Like, there was so much bad press about him. He is such a horrible, horrible person. In many ways, worse than Trump. Now, Trump's worse in a unique way that's a special threat because he's a fascist and he speaks to fascists, and that's really bad. Pence is worse in that he's a theocrat, which is a different kind of bad, also still bad, though. So, I can handle Pence for a few months if it means we remove Trump, but it's still unlikely. Yes, Chloe. So, if Bernie scares the establishment so much that they pick the second most left-wing person, Warren, and then Warren becomes the nominee, that's a hell of a lot better than, like I said earlier, that would be better absolutely than any president we've had in the last 50 years. Warren would be a good president, but she's not good enough. And that's the problem. We need somebody who's willing to fight for the people. Politicians are gaslighting us. This is how the country's an oligarch. They tell voters one thing, they get into office and ignore the voters and speak to the oligarchs and the donor class. This is the biggest issue in the world, and because of that, the most important thing is integrity. The passion to fight for the people. And Warren has not shown that. She's way too buddy-buddy with the rest of the Democrats. She's never hard on them. She just recently came to the defense of Biden in all of this. She defends other Democrats. She doesn't pressure them. In order to pass anything we want, you have to put a lot of pressure on the blue dog Democrats who are not willing to progress. There's a lot of blue dog Democrats who are not interested in Medicare for all. They're not interested in taking aggressive action on climate change. And we need somebody who will fight that. Bernie Sanders, I listen to a lot of secular talk, a lot of Kyle Kalinske. It's a great show. And he talks about this a lot, about how we need to have somebody who's willing to fight for it. So he got the opportunity to interview Bernie Sanders, and he asked him straight up, what would you do if a Democrat is something along the line? What would you do if a Democrat was refusing to vote for your Medicare for all bill and other bills like that? And he said, I would go to their home state, their home district, and I would hold rallies. Which means he would put vast pressure on them from their own district that if you want to get reelected, you best get in line. And that's the only way we're going to make things happen. So that's extremely exciting to me. Warren would be a lot better than anybody else. I just don't think she's good enough. So we got to fight for Bernie. If Warren is the nominee, I'm still going to fight for her because she's going to be a hell of a lot better than any other alternative. So I don't want to hurt her chances by talking too much ill will of her, but she's no Bernie Sanders, and we got to fight for Bernie. She's not a replacement for him. One of the stories that came out about her recently, she's famously, supposedly progressive and against corruption and against taking money from large donors. And she's promised not to do that in the primaries. And most leftists know that in her interview with the Young Turks, she said she would take large donors and PAC money in the general election. That's already kind of bad. But what just came out recently is before she announced her primary bid, she raised $10 million from large donors all over the country in advance of her run, so that then she could swear off large donors during the primary run and then go immediately back to it in the general. So is she against corruption in politics? The number one most important issue we have to fight for? Because if we can't get the money out of politics, we can't do anything else. We can't fix climate change. We can't prevent 6 billion people from dying. If we don't get the money out of politics, if we don't take back control of our government, if we don't make it a government of, by, and for the people again, it's gonna get bad. So that sucks. And we need to fight for Bernie Sanders. He has a real chance. He has the best chance we've seen since, even in 2016 he had a chance, but it was always like an outside chance. Now I would consider him a front runner. Biden's been slipping ever since he started. Bernie has far more grassroots support. He has far more donors. He has far more excitement at his rallies. He has far more volunteers working for him on the ground. Nobody's excited about Biden. Biden is slipping. And when he loses the first state, it's going to crumble. Which means that they're propping up Warren, so she'll be there to challenge. But if Bernie wins New Hampshire, which looks like he will, and California, which he likely will, then he can breeze into office. And we need to fight for that and not accept anybody else as an option, because there are no other options. Warren is weaker on not taking corporate money in the primary, so she's shown she can buy. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think states are the only ones who can cancel primaries, which it is amazing. One of my favorite memes is one I made that says that it's basically a ripoff on the Steven Crowder Change My Mind thing, and it says, conservatives have no consistent principles. Change my mind. Like, literally, there's not one single, value, one principle you can talk about. They're not pro-life. They're supporting the wars that have killed hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians. They're against Medicare for All, which would save 30 to 40,000 people a year. They're not pro-life. You can go down the list. There's nothing they're consistent on. And anyway, they're certainly not consistent on democracy. And the fact that they're canceling their own primaries in states because they don't want to... we know nobody has a chance of beating Trump in a primary at the moment. Now, if he's getting impeached, all of a sudden he would have a better chance. But they don't even want to give somebody the chance to primaries. So there's actually states that have canceled their primaries because they don't want to have anyone even talking ill of Trump in their state, which is pathetic. It's deeply authoritarian and anti-American. Yes, and this is important to realize. Bernie Sanders was... there's a lot of liberals who held 2016 against him because he didn't drop out of the race as soon as they thought he should have. He stayed in for 6 weeks after. And they criticized him for that. And yet, because he stayed in and he had leverage at the convention, he forced them to make some real changes. And this is powerful. These are the kind of changes you need to make to have a chance later. He's playing the long game. He got rid of superdelegates on the first round of voting, but they're still there in the second round. So if he doesn't win 50% of the electors, of the delegates, then the superdelegates all of a sudden get to come back in. So he has to win 50% of the delegates because the superdelegates aren't going to vote for him. So he needs to not just win, he needs to win 50%. We got to fight for him. Yeah. I don't know if Trump can run again if he gets impeached. But if he gets impeached, he can say it's a witch hunt. and refuse to leave office and investigate people and say there's an investigation into the legitimacy of the proceedings. And 38% of the country would support him, and that's how much Hitler had. So we need to be active and be building the movement, be ready for something crazy like that to happen. Because the only chance of success, if Trump took like an actual if he implemented a fascist coup, the only chance of success would be massive action from the entire country immediately. If we waited, then anger will fade and you'll never get another chance. So the only chance, if something like that happened, which hopefully it's a low possibility, but I like to think about all the probabilities and prepare for them. If he announced that he's staying in office even though he's been removed or even though he lost an election, we need everybody to stop working. We're talking national strike on everything, and take to the streets and head to Washington, D.C. and just massive action. And that's the only chance we would have to stop something like that. So I do think that's something we should think about. But I did want to talk about climate some more. So this is, I would say it's an argument, but it's not even an argument. It's just facts. So climate facts. CO2 in the atmosphere traps heat and raises temperature. This is easily demonstrated in lab experiments, non-controversial. You can't argue with that. So when I'm rhetorically, if I'm talking to somebody, I like to build my argument brick by brick, with each brick so solid that you cannot disagree with it. And by the time you're done, all of a sudden you have to accept the conclusion. You've built to the conclusion. It's rock solid. There's no escape. Like it's you can be forced through logic to change your beliefs on things if you're at all open to it. And a lot of people aren't. But this works better in a live conversation on like internet and whatnot. Like there's a lot of studies on the effectiveness of text versus voice disagreements. And anyway, that would notwithstanding, these points lead to one another. So the first point, CO2. Second point, humanity's put out a significant amount of carbon, of CO2. That's non-controversial. We've burned a tremendous amount of fossil fuels, and those fossil fuels took millions and millions of years to generate. So we've put millions of years worth of carbon into the atmosphere. CO2 has went up dramatically since the industrial age. Did I have something pulled up on that? This is easy to Google. If you're ever in an argument with somebody and they bring that up, you can Google CO2 chart, and you can put in a time frame, but it's very clear that CO2's gone up. Like every organization that measures this shows it pretty clearly. That's not CO2 in general. I was wondering why I was showing it going down. That's talking about transportation emissions. But CO2 levels in the atmosphere have gone up substantially. That's a huge increase. This is a historical one from NASA. And so these are thousands of years before today. It's, there is a cyclical action here, clearly. But we passed the peak of the cyclical action in 1950. And now we're way up here. So that's a non-controversial point as well. So obviously, average global temperatures have risen with the CO2 faster than climate changes on its own. That's a fact. Like you can look at the historical temperature record and the temperature's going up. Like most conservatives have gotten to the point where they agree with this. They might say, well, climate change is on its own, or we might have an impact, but we don't know how much. But they can't really disagree that it's risen. But this is where we get to the first thing that some people would disagree with. Controlling for other primary drivers of climate, such as the sun, and other natural sources for carbon, such as volcanoes, leaves no other explanation for the rise in temperature except for the carbon man is putting out. And this is my favorite way to show that because it's very visual. And Bloomberg is not like the most leftist publication. It's a lot of conservatives should be willing to listen to it. So it has this beautiful little slideshow of the actual recorded trends. This is just reality. So temperature went up. Now what's doing it? So they put up again a bunch of different options here. So is it the Earth's orbit? No, orbital changes do not account for that. Is it the sun? Nope. Is it volcanoes? People love to say that one volcano can put out more CO2, which not true at all. We human industries put out 100 times more CO2 than volcanic activity. And eruptions actually cool the planet. Like there's this thing called volcanic winter. Anyway, so it's certainly not. Is it all three of these things combined? Nope. Is it deforestation? Nope. Dark forests are yielding to lighter patches, which actually has a slight cooling effect. Did not know that. Ozone pollution. Nope. Aerosol pollution. Nope. That's actually a slight cooling effect, but it's not enough to counter the CO2. This is the CO2 line, and we can see it's going up with the temperature. So I love that little chart. It's a good point. And then from there we go on to ice melts when temperature rises. Trying to be non-controversial. That's a pretty solid brick, I think. Water expands when temperature rises. Pretty obvious. So those things obviously show that the sea rises. Both of those combined. Positive feedback mechanisms exist that are accelerating climate change and could cause a runaway snowball effect we won't be able to counter. So the permafrost is melting, releasing methane. The bare earth absorbs more heat than white snow. And the carbon that's naturally sequestered, most of that is from the phytoplankton in the ocean. And there's less phytoplankton in an ocean that's warmer. So as the ocean warms, it can't sequester less carbon. That's a huge problem. We don't know of any negative feedback mechanisms that can reverse this. They're all positive, which is concerning. So if you can't counter these facts, you have to accept the conclusion of anthropogenic global climate change. And all the rest of the arguments you see from denialists are irrelevant red herrings. They talk about, you'll see an article that the Antarctica gained 80 billion tons of ice. But they don't mention that Greenland lost 180 billion. So you have to look at the whole planet. We're talking about the global climate here. They talk about picking small portions of data, about how if you put 3 or 5 years together, it looks like the temperature's been steady or going down. But when you look at the whole picture, it's clearly going up. Not controlling for all the factors. They love to claim that there's been mistakes in the models. If anyone tells you the predictions have failed, challenge them to show you one single mainstream scientific prediction that has failed. One within the last 40 years. They can't do it because there aren't any. The scientific predictions have been extraordinarily accurate. What they'll show you is headlines from idiot journalists and people who are being hyperbolic, Al Gore and some other people like that, who made some claims that weren't entirely accurate, weren't based on the science. But the science has been very clear. And what the science is saying now, based on those same models that have been proven accurate, is very concerning. So it's a very simple argument. I did want to wrap up on the climate by saying I am optimistic. I think that humanity is going to survive almost no matter what. Like, our technology gives us a huge benefit. And yes, a lot of people could die. Yes, World War III could happen. I'm optimistic that some of humanity will survive. I'm also optimistic in our ability to avoid much of the problem if we take massive action. We can solve this. There's a lot of different avenues I've seen that we can solve it. So for one, I was reading up on biofuels, and I learned that you could generate enough biofuel to replace the United States use of fossil fuel with algae farms that take up about the land space of Maine. It's pretty easy. And these algae farms are actually the most efficient way to get carbon out of the air, because that's what they're doing. They're sucking carbon out of the air and growing the algae. And if you, the long and short of how you reverse climate change is you get the carbon out of the air and back into the ground. So if we put in enough infrastructure to replace fossil fuels with renewable energy, and we had things like algae farms, etc., that are taking some of the carbon out of the air, we might be able to get a handle on this thing. If we put in the kind of infrastructure to replace farms that fail because of lack of water and because farming areas turn to a dust bowl because they have massive droughts, which will happen with the earth warming. If we put in vertical farms that run on renewable energy, it's basically skyscrapers where it's just farms within a building and there's like 100 stories to it. Like, we can replace it. We can keep producing enough food for everybody. We can have a win-win scenario where the standard of living for the most of us actually improves. That's possible. We just need to fight for it. There's two different perspectives on climate change. And the reason I think conservatives fight so hard is because they have a legitimate concern about the perspective on climate change that the establishment pushes. The establishment tells you, shame on you for driving an SUV. You're causing climate change. Shame on you for using a plastic straw. You're causing climate change. Shame on you for running your air conditioner. You're causing climate change. And their legitimate concern is that they will be the ones hurt. That's why the Yellow Vest protests in France took over the whole country, is because France was trying to tax the poor and middle class to reverse climate change. That's not going to work. We can't hurt the majority of people. It wasn't us that caused this. It was Exxon. They knew about this problem 40 freaking years ago, and they funded climate denial instead. We need to make them pay for it. We need to make the oligarchs pay for it. And that's the perspective that we can sell. Because if we're going to try to target the middle class and make them pay for this shit, they ain't going to want to, and we will never get anywhere. We will not be able to solve climate change. The only perspective on this that has a chance of success is the perspective of the Green New Deal, which is, we're going to solve climate change and make your life better. We're going to redistribute wealth. We're going to fund infrastructure. We're going to put people to work paying better jobs. And through this process of changing our entire infrastructure to renewable energy, we're going to put so much money back into the economy through the poor and the middle class that your life will get better. That is possible. That is 100% possible, and that's the only way we can do it. All right, let's catch up on some comments. Yeah, so don't get confused between impeachment and the Senate. So the House impeaches, and that doesn't really do anything. Clinton got impeached. He still served out his term. The Senate needs to actually vote to convict and remove him from office. And that's may or may not happen. Probably won't, but it could. I'd like to Google that. Let's see. Trump was impeached. Could he run again? I wonder if there's any legal articles. Because I think that you're right. That's all the Constitution says. The case for removing him from office but letting him run again in 2020. No. Could you imagine? I mean, he is already on the ballot. Yeah, so it looks like you could actually run for office after being impeached. Wouldn't that be awesome? Well, he needs to legitimately lose. We need to take him down. We need to beat him. We need to not just remove him through a political process like impeachment. We need to actually beat him electorally. Chloe, do you mean if the right agrees it's risen? Are you talking about the global temperature? Because if you ask them why it's risen, they just climate goes, weather changes, it goes up and down, climate's cyclical. It's probably and then this is where they just start throwing out guesses. It's volcanoes throw out stuff, and there's the Earth has a wobble, and they some of the other planets are having ice ages right now, while we're having there's all kinds of weird stuff that comes up that's not relevant, and that's why I like that Bloomberg article I was showing. I keep losing my space. Anyway, that one. Because it's a visual aid that controls against the other factors. So these are all things that they say. Like, maybe climate change is caused by this. Nope, it's not. Maybe climate change is caused by sunspot activity. No, it's not. Like, we've measured all of that stuff. We've controlled against the other variables. It is CO2, and it's the CO2 we're putting out. It's very, very, very clear. Oh, of course they're defunding NASA. Conservatives are very anti-science. I haven't seen any polling that breaks it down by party affiliation, but I guarantee a majority of the Republican Party believes in young Earth creationism. They're not pro-science. And I get that because the polls I have seen show that about 40% of the country believes the Earth is under 10,000 years old and God created everything in its current form, and that there was a global flood and stuff like this. So if 40% of the country believe that, that means most of evangelicals do, because that's about the right percentage. And yeah, I'm pretty sure a majority of Republicans believe that based on those numbers. I don't think a whole lot of Democrats do. Yeah, so the Senate can remove him from office. They can't actually enforce criminal penalties or anything like that. They remove him from office, at which point he can be indicted and charged with more crimes, I'm pretty sure. No, yeah, most of the models don't go that far. Like, we looked at it, the one article, it said if the Earth's temperature goes up 4 degrees Celsius, 6 billion people die. It's a very bad scenario. But it's also possible we get to 6 or 8 degrees Celsius within 100 years. And it could keep going from there. So I'm very optimistic that humanity can reverse it. If you think about the fact that there's 7 billion humans on the planet, and our level of productivity is outstanding. Like, if we were all united to one end, I have no doubt we could change it. Like, we've been studying the technology to terraform other planets. If we can terraform other planets, we can start with our own. But we would need to be united as a planet. You can't have a couple countries fighting climate change and other countries not giving a crap. We need to be working together as a planet. So that's where people who are pessimistic come in, because it is hard to imagine everybody being suddenly working together. Yes, this is routinely comes up every time. I probably saw this a dozen times. Conservatives talking about Greta, and they're like, "Well, how'd she get to the UN? Did she row a boat there? Like, don't tell me she took fossil fuels to get to the UN." Like, they do this for anybody who's talking about it. Like, did you take a plane there? Did you take a limo there? Uh, and the point we have to pound into their skulls is It is literally impossible to solve climate change through individual action. Literally impossible. That the whole conservative mindset is individual responsibility. It's hard for them to get outside of that, but you can't do it individually because 70% of CO2 is put out by 100 companies. So even if we all changed, that's 30% of it. That's not enough. And we can't change the infrastructure. We can't change the entire grid. We can't do this kind of stuff. Now, the government could, there are potentially right-wing type approaches to it. The carbon tax is actually the right-wing approach. Like leftists would say, seize the means of production and force things to become more sustainable and renewable. The Republican way should be, if they actually had a solution, which they don't, should be the carbon tax. Because that would change the incentive structure within the market to encourage innovation and the changes that we need. But instead, it's the liberals putting out the carbon tax and the Republicans just advocating for us all dying, apparently. There is no science backing their positions. And they don't care. It's really important to remember conservatives are not necessarily dumb. I know some very intelligent conservatives. It's not a matter of IQ, though. It's a matter of how you think. And you can be extremely intelligent, and you can use that intelligence to rationalize your current beliefs because you want to stay a loyal part of your tribe. Conservatism is very dependent upon tribalism. They're the tribe. They don't want to be ostracized. They didn't reason themselves into those positions, and it's extremely hard to reason them out. That's why I would like to build... I'm quite confident I could build up to my entire worldview brick by brick in such a way that if you followed along the entire time, you would have to agree at the end of it. And if there's some flaw in the thinking as I built it, that could be pointed out. That's the benefit to doing things methodologically. That's the benefit to showing your work. That's, I think, is the most important principle of critical thinking, is being methodological, showing your work. You have premises leading to a conclusion. You show your equations. You show how this point leads to this point, leads to this point, leads to this point, leads to this point, leads to this conclusion. Because when you do that, if somebody disagrees, they either followed along and are forced into the same conclusion, or there's like, this point right here, you got this wrong. And then you might have to reassess your position and be like, okay, maybe that's a bad argument. But you don't get there unless you're methodological. Now, it is hard to get most people to follow along because they do not want to change their position. They are part of a tribe. They go to church with these people. They hang out with these people. They listen to Fox News. They listen to Rush Limbaugh. It's their whole echo chamber. They don't want to lose that. Like, whether it's conscious or unconscious, they're part of that tribe and they don't want to lose it. So it is very hard to reason them out of it. I should probably wind down a little bit. We've been going for a while here. But a good way to wind up is talking about the backfire effect. So when we argue with people and we get heated and we get confrontational, it triggers people's defenses and they're less likely to change your mind. This doesn't mean we should never do it. If you're online, like, you're not going to change people's mind anyway. A lot of times you're just going for the audience. And sometimes if somebody's really dumb or a fascist or something like that, making them look weak and pathetic and ridiculous is about the best you can do. The logic doesn't even matter. It's the rhetoric. It's making them look bad. Because fascists are all about strength. If they would love to make you mad, they don't want to make you laugh. If you're laughing at them, they get mad. And that's a good thing. The best way to change somebody's mind is definitely either in person or with a voiced conversation, which is why I have the Discord server, which you're all welcome to join. Love to just hang out and have some chats sometime. Let me put a link in chat. And in chat we go. Okay. So if you're debating somebody that you care about and you want to change your mind, start with building rapport. Start with strengthening those portions of their identity that are outside of what you're talking about. So if I was talking to somebody, I'd be looking to build rapport. I'd be asking them, hey, what do you do for fun? Where do you live? Where do you come from? Oh yeah, I came from a place all like that. I grew up in a rural area. Which building rapport is the building commonality. You're looking for common ground. You want them to subconsciously start to think of you as their tribe. That's going to bring down the defense walls so that they can actually think more objectively and consider your position and increase your chances of getting through. You're not looking to change somebody's mind entirely, but if you can just make them think about something, if you can crack the wall of certainty that protects their worldview and plant a seed of doubt, then that doubt can grow and they can start questioning things, and before you know it, they can be a full-fledged leftist like me. That's what happened to me. So, build the identity, build rapport, and then after that, look for the common values. Like, I think with how divided this country is, a lot of people think that the other side is their enemy, and it's valuable to think about and talk about the values you have in common. So, we all want to live a better life. We all want to maximize well-being. We all want to live in a society where more people are happy. So that's why in these kind of conversations where we're legitimately trying to change somebody's mind, I don't want to use a label. I'm not going to call myself a socialist. I'm not going to call myself a leftist. I'm going to use descriptive terminology. I'm going to say, I want to maximize well-being from behind the veil of ignorance, which means no matter who you are, you get a fair shot at life. That's what I'm looking for. Do you agree? I mean, that's hard to disagree with. You say, I support the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Using some lingo like that. Yeah, freedom. I'm all about freedom. I think it's very important to be pro-freedom and advocate for it, and to use to steal some of the conservative language. Facts over feelings is one I love to steal. Talk about freedom. I consider myself libertarian leftist because we have to justify government authority getting involved on any issue. Like, that is an argument I think libertarians are right on, is anytime you pass a law, if you refuse to comply, there's going to be government jackboots forcing you to do it at some point, eventually. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do anything. It just means you have to justify it. You have to show the greater good in the government being involved here. And that's actually not hard to do for every leftist position. So, with a few exceptions of a couple things I might disagree on, but in general, it's not hard to demonstrate that need. So I would still consider myself libertarian leftist, even though I want a larger government that's involved in more things, because I'm justifying that need. Yeah. And talking to libertarians, certainly it's they like to say that taxation is theft and government is force. And it's like, if my favorite argument for that is that in exactly the same way that taxation is theft, if that is true, profit is also theft. So, it's two sides of the same coin. If taxation isn't theft, neither is profit. If taxation is theft, then profit is also theft. Like, the arguments work both ways. You can try it. Every time they make an argument for why taxation is theft, you can apply the same concept to profit. It's really fun, actually. So I love using people's arguments against them. And you can do it by saying, I'm not even saying that profit's theft. I'm just saying the same arguments work. And they do. So. Fun times. Man, I've been talking for 2 hours. How are we doing, guys? Got any other comments before we sign out here? The right's been calling people socialists forever, and that's a beautiful thing because it's kind of desensitized people to the word. Now socialism is more popular than capitalism, if I'm not mistaken, in the U.S. So it doesn't have any sting to it anymore. And I do like the way of defending that, where you're just talking about, I want workers to own the means of production. Like, we're not talking about government-run economies and markets necessarily. We just, workers owning the places where they work. It doesn't have to be the government that owns it, just the workers, worker co-ops. If you had a whole economy of worker co-ops, it would be a much better world. We'd all have more say in where we work. It'd be more fair, more equitable, and it's a good thing to work toward. Yeah, we have to be trying to win over conservatives. We have to be. If we want to ever achieve anything, we have to win some over. We don't have to win them all over. We're not going to win them all over. But things are balanced on such a razor line here. If we win just 1 or 2%, like, we can go a long way on that. Yeah, it's true that with power, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Seems to have been pretty true. So we need checks and balances. We need a government of, by, and for the people. And there needs to be not anybody in that government that's not extremely accountable to the people. Because otherwise you end up with the kind of authoritarian socialist countries which have failed. And have they failed with help from capitalist countries pressuring? I'm sure, but they still failed. And authoritarianism has caused most of the problems we see in history. Whether it's Hitler's Germany or Stalin's Russia or China or even a lot of other countries, authoritarianism leads to atrocity. So I do not support the kind of authoritarian socialism, and neither do most people. But a free economy of worker-owned places where the workers own the means of production, like, how can you argue against that? Like, it's just a no-brainer. Who wouldn't want that? Like, if you're in favor of democracy, why would you want democracy where you spend a third of your life? Of course you would. So anyway, thanks all for being here, and I'll be streaming again on Monday. Not quite sure what I'm going to talk about yet. More politics, or see what happens in the news, or might have something else. Maybe we'll just do Monday Fun Day, play some games. But anyway, thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you on Monday.